Okay, so we're on page 35 and we're going to go into opening, running, and maintaining a pharmacy. So the authority to manufacture, distribute, prescribe, dispense non-controlled drugs comes from the state in which the facility or practitioner is licensed. Excuse me. So again, the authority to manufacture, distribute, prescribe, or dispense non-controlled drugs comes from the state in which the person is licensed to practice. The first step in opening a pharmacy is obtaining the license, the pharmacy license or permit from the state. So while the conditions are state specific, the following are pretty much standard as part of the licensing application. So you would have to provide the physical address of the pharmacy, the classification of the pharmacy, so if it's a community, hospital, or specialty, the name and license number of the pharmacist in charge, the PIC or PIC, the application fee, which would be payable to the licensing agency, the National Provider Identification Number, the NPI number for the pharmacy. So again, you would want to list the address, the classification, the name and license number of the PIC, provide the application fee, and the NPI number for the pharmacy. States generally require that the licensing agency or the Board of Pharmacy, they generally require inspection, right? So the pharmacy has to be inspected during the application process and then periodically thereafter. After initial licensure, the pharmacy will have to renew the license. Usually the renewal might be done like every year or biannually, and this would typically be by submission of a renewal application plus the fee. Out-of-state and non-resident pharmacies and wholesalers, manufacturers, repackagers, distributors, and third-party logistics providers, they need to also be licensed in the states in which they do business. The licensing process for non-resident pharmacies is often similar to the process for in-state pharmacies. There may be additional fees that are required, such as an inspection fee if the state board has to travel to the out-of-state, local, or contract. There may be additional fees that are required, like inspection fees if the state board has to travel to an out-of-state location, or if they have to contract with third parties to inspect the non-resident facility. After obtaining a state license or permit, the facility or prescriber needs to register with the DEA for authorization to handle or prescribe controlled substances. After the initial approval, the DEA will then send a registration renewal notice to the registrant 60 days prior to expiration of their permit. Renewal is required every 3 years, and this is again for the DEA authorization. The process will be discussed even further in the Controlled Substances chapter, part 2. So let's see. All the license holders, including wholesalers, manufacturers, repackagers, distributors, third-party logistics providers, and pharmacies, they are subject to disciplinary action for practice violations. Penalties can include suspensions, revocations of state licensure or DEA registration. Now let's see. Offenses resulting in the suspension or revocation of a license are similar to those resulting in disciplinary actions against pharmacy staff. So, for example, a pharmacy could lose its license if it is operating as a pill mill, if it's filling excessive and inappropriate opioid prescriptions. Let's see. The DEA registration could also be revoked. In this situation. Yeah, definitely. So again, for example, the pharmacy as a whole could lose its license if it's operating as a pill mill. The DEA registration could also then be revoked in that scenario. Disciplinary actions may also result in fines, and depending upon the offense committed, individuals within the organization could face criminal charges. The punishment would obviously vary state to state. Moving to page 36. We have out-of-state and mail order pharmacies. So again, these would be called out-of-state and non-resident. Out-of-state or non-resident synonyms, and mail order pharmacies, they can dispense prescriptions to patients who live in different states, as we know. These pharmacies can be required to comply with the laws of the state where the pharmacy is located. Maybe also the state where the patients live, or both. So almost all states require out-of-state and mail-order pharmacies to be registered or licensed in the state where the patient lives. So inspections may be required, initial inspections annual or biennial. The pharmacist in charge may or may not be required to be licensed in the patient's home state. For more information regarding mail-order pharmacies, please see the drug delivery through the mail or by a pharmacy employee section. As an out-of-state pharmacy can perform centralized or shared services for another pharmacy. So this could be dispensing, drug utilization reviews or DURs. They could process, the out-of-state pharmacy could process insurance claims. They could obtain refill authorizations, and they could also make therapeutic interventions. In most cases, both of the pharmacies have to be licensed by each pharmacy board. Common requirements would include that the pharmacies have the same owner, they have a written contract which outlines their individual responsibilities, and they also need to share electronic files. Patients should be notified if another pharmacy does fill their prescription. All pharmacies that dispense controlled substances must have a valid DEA registration unless they're exempt, and they must meet Prescription Drug Monitoring Program (PDMP) requirements when applicable. Moving on to specialty pharmacies. The treatment of certain diseases can require complicated medication regimens. Typically, they would be injectable, and they would necessitate intensive patient education and monitoring. High medication costs and the complexity of reimbursement and the REMS, the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, REMS compliance, has led to increased reliance on specialty pharmacies. Most states do not have a separate pharmacy license that only applies to specialty pharmacies, though a separate permit may be required for compounding in some states. So again, as we know, most states, they don't have the separate pharmacy license, which only applies to specialty pharmacies. Though the separate permit, it might be required for compounding in some states. That's very important. Accreditation by an outside agency may be required by companies that contract with the specialty pharmacy, for example, insurance companies or manufacturers of drugs with restricted distribution. The NABP, the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, recognizes nuclear and radiologic pharmacy practice as a specialty. The operator of a licensed nuclear pharmacy must be qualified. They must be a qualified nuclear pharmacist. Right, so the operator of the licensed nuclear pharmacy, they have to be a qualified nuclear pharmacist that is board certified, and they will require other types of training as well. A qualified nuclear pharmacist has to be present at all times when the pharmacy is open. Nuclear pharmacies must follow regulations for inspection, radioactive storage and record keeping set by the state radiological agency or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. Radiopharmaceuticals have unique labeling requirements for the immediate container and outer delivery container. It would say, caution, radioactive material. So that sticker must be present along with other specifics about the product's general activity. So we just covered out-of-state, non-resident and mail-order pharmacies, specialty pharmacies, and now we're going to the bottom of page 36, talking about pharmacy inspection. State boards may conduct inspections to ensure a pharmacy is compliant with federal and state laws and regulations. The items inspected commonly include record-keeping systems, compliance with the Controlled Substances Act, as well as temperature logs for refrigeration units. The pharmacy could be subject to minor or major infractions if the requirements are not met. Most states provide self-assessment or self-inspection. So yeah, that's true. So most states, they do provide the self-assessment forms. for the pharmacy staff to use, which could potentially identify any deficiencies and allow you to self-inspect and self-correct them, preferably prior to an announced or an unannounced board inspection. The completion of these forms may be required on a scheduled basis. Yep, so the completion of these forms will be required on a scheduled basis. The self-inspection form is useful. Don't forget to look at it. Obviously, it's useful for MPJE preparation because it includes the items that the state board feels are important. There are typically going to be separate forms for the outpatient pharmacy setting, the inpatient setting, as well as sterile compounding pharmacies setting. So let's keep going. We're on page 37. We're going to review space and equipment. So a facility that stores and distributes prescription drugs, it should comply with the standards that are set by the USP and the State Board of Pharmacy. This includes requirements regarding facility size, construction, storage space. Yep, so a facility that stores and distributes prescription drugs should comply with the standards set by USP and the Board of Pharmacy. This includes requirements regarding the size of the facility, the construction of it, and the storage space requirements. The space must be maintained in a clean and orderly condition. It must be in a commercial location. It must have restricted access and include inventory controls to identify any theft and diversion. All facilities must publicly display or have readily available all licenses of the licensed personnel. An individual state board of pharmacy can mandate requirements for additional specifications as well. If sterile medications are being prepared in the facility, they must be prepared in a laminar flow hood and or a biological safety cabinet. You can reference the compounding chapter for more on that, which we will read later. Other equipment which may be required includes the dose calibrator, analytical balance, lead shielded drawing station, if involved with radiopharmaceuticals, assorted glassware, a microscope, thermometer, refrigeration equipment, syringes, decontamination supplies, and transport and packing material. Instruments must be calibrated at scheduled times, and a record of calibration should be available in the pharmacy. The State Board of Pharmacy can mandate requirements for additional specifications as well, which may be found on the self-assessment/inspection form. We're at the bottom of page 37 under the heading Libraries. A pharmacist should keep a current copy of the state laws and regulations, drug information, resources, and references applicable to the specific type of work performed. If permitted to perform therapeutic substitution, they should have access to bioequivalency references like the FDA Orange Book. That would be required. Every state permits the use of electronic reference materials with a few state-specific requirements. All right, so we're on page 38. We're gonna go and look at pharmacy security. All pharmacists on duty are responsible for the security of the pharmacy. This includes effective control against theft and diversion. The space must be secured by a physical or electronic barrier that can be locked, preferably, and track entry in and out of this space. Pharmacy access by non-pharmacy personnel needs to be kept to a minimum, and any entry of non-pharmacy staff will be at the discretion of the pharmacist. Security systems should include protection against outside and inside theft, which includes theft of electronic information as well as patient records. In order to maintain the security and confidentiality of patient records, the computer system must have safeguards for entry. The system has to be backed up, and the prescription information should be available quickly. The NABP, National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, recommends a 2-hour time period in order to retrieve backup prescription data. An auxiliary system like manually recorded hard copies must be used to store refill information in the event of a system outage. When the computer system has been down and inoperable and then comes back up, all prescription information that has been manually recorded during this time needs to be entered promptly. In the event that the prescription information is permanently lost, the Board of Pharmacy should be notified within 24 hours. So we're still on page 38. We're going to go through advertising and signage. The state board may have requirements or restrictions on signage and advertising. Some pharmacies advertise prescription drug prices to the public, such as like $4 or $10 generic drug listings.